Hey guys, just a quick update before I begin. During the editing phase of this video, the developers of Post Trauma released a patch that addresses many complaints people had with the game at launch. While I will address these changes when necessary, it's also important to know that I have not yet had the time to go super in depth with the new patch, so apologies if I forget to mention anything in particular. I've just had a lot of shit to deal with lately. Like the fact that I cut my own hair last week, and I was super happy with it, until someone informed me the other day that I had not trimmed the back properly, so apparently I've been walking around with a fucking mullet for the last 7 days. Post Trauma is an old school survival horror game, developed by Red Soul Games and released for PC, PS5 and Xbox in April of 2025. By the developer's own admission, Post Trauma is heavily inspired by survival horror games from the PS2 era, and after completing the game, I can tell that the developers were massive fans of Silent Hill 3 in particular. Several of the environments and story beats in Post Trauma borrow heavily from that game. While I was looking forward to Post Trauma, I had no intention of reviewing the game at release. Yes, the trailers certainly made the game look interesting, but I was fairly certain Post Trauma was just going to be another by the numbers indie survival horror game with very few interesting ideas of its own. But after completing the game twice at time of writing, like holy shit, I need to talk about this game right now. First off, I know that this is a very new game. Or at least it is as I am currently writing these words. It almost definitely won't be a new game by the time I get this video out, however, because of how much I suck at this shit. Regardless, this video will not spoil anything from the last 3 hours of the game. I will not show any boss fights besides the first one, and I will also only show a handful of puzzles. Trust me, there are dozens of puzzles in Post Trauma. I could not spoil them all in this video even if I tried. Having said that, if you want to avoid any and all spoilers and would simply like to hear my quick opinion on the game, I recommend Post Trauma. It's only €15 or dollars, and for that money you get a 6 to 7 hour game with plenty of love and passion poured into it. I should also state, however, that I agree with many of the complaints critics had with the game. Post Trauma is very flawed, but it comes so close to greatness at times that it's easy to forgive many of its failings. For a first time effort, Red Soul Games have created an incredibly impressive experience here. But that makes it all the more frustrating that with just a few tweaks here and there, Post Trauma could have easily gone from being simply a good game to a great one. There's a lot to talk about with this one, so let's get into it. Post Trauma begins with a man named Carlos aiming a gun at a man begging for his life, before finally shooting him in the head. So already I'm relating pretty strongly with this Carlos guy. That's a good sign. The game then cuts to an elderly Asian man named Roman, awakening in a subway train with seemingly no recollection of how he came to be there. This is where control is handed over to the player. And as I said earlier, anyone who has previously played survival horror games like Silent Hill 3 will instantly be hit with a wave of deja vu here. For an indie title developed by only a small handful of people, it is crazy how accurately Post Trauma is able to mimic the look and feel of a classic survival horror game. The fixed camera angles, moody atmospheric soundtrack, every fucking door being locked, all of it contributes massively to the feeling that Post Trauma is a hidden relic from the PS2 era. This subway train is a simple tutorial area designed to introduce players to how the game controls and the kind of puzzles they'll have to solve. The first puzzle is surprisingly tricky and will probably stump a lot of players. I thankfully had no such problems though. Mainly because I spent 10 minutes trying to guess the final two numbers. Soon after unlocking the door, Roman escapes the train and begins making his way towards a nearby subway station, in a scene very reminiscent of the opening to Silent Hill Origins. It's worth noting that despite their obvious reverence for classic survival horror games from the early 2000s, Red Soul Games chose not to use tank controls for post-trauma, instead opting for a more traditional control scheme used in the majority of games released today. Funnily enough, after completing the game, I really felt like post-trauma would have benefited massively from at least having the option to use tank controls, as the constantly shifting camera angles can sometimes make moving Roman about feel a little unwieldy. Thankfully, the developers realised this, during the production of this fucking video of course, and added the option to use tank controls, which does clean up many of my issues with the occasionally disorienting camera. Unfortunately, tank controls come with their own set of issues, and while using them, turning becomes far more slow and cumbersome, which can be a massive issue during combat encounters. Unfortunately, there's always going to be some control issues in a game that uses fixed camera angles, regardless of what control scheme you use. That doesn't mean I dislike the fixed camera angles in post-trauma though, quite the opposite in fact. Post-trauma is a shining example of what can be accomplished when fixed camera angles are used effectively in video games. So many of these shots are just stunning to look at and inject so much personality into what would otherwise be quite bland environments. The fact that practically every modern game today chooses to use a fully rotatable 3D camera is still so disappointing to me. I mean sure, 3D cameras definitely come with their own benefits, but they also suck a lot of the spark and personality out of your environments. You need only look at the fixed camera mod for the RE2 remake to see how much more foreboding the RPD station could have looked if Capcom had just had the balls to not make their game good or actually playable. In any case, post-trauma's fixed camera angles not only make environments more visually interesting to look at, they also add massively to the game's eerie atmosphere. I'm just going to say it, post-trauma is surprisingly scary. I don't think it quite hits the same levels as Silent Hill 2, but there were rooms in post-trauma that the second I entered them, all I wanted to do was nope the fuck out of there. It also helps that post-trauma's soundtrack is fantastic at getting under your skin. The game's score was composed by Nicholas Gasparini and is so good that it's almost worth the $15 price tag alone. I admittedly rolled my eyes when the game's opening credits theme played, as I thought this guy was just another Akira Yamaoka wannabe. However, Nicholas definitely came into his own the further into post-trauma I got, and a lot of his stuff in the game really creeped me out at times. Needless to say, this guy has a lot of talent and a bright future ahead of him. So anyways, after arriving at the subway station, Roman finds a locked gate, which stops him from proceeding further into the station. However, by going back the way you came, a door mysteriously appears that wasn't there previously. Very cool. In this room, Roman finds a crowbar that will allow him to not only break open the gate from earlier, but also defend himself from anything that might be lurking in the station. Roman manages to get past the gate, but he's soon going to wish he hadn't.
Hello? Thank God. I thought I was alone here. Can you help me? Or are you lost too?
I think it's a testament to how good post-trauma's enemy design is, that I was actually very freaked out when this thing started lunging towards me. It has such an unnatural way of moving itself about. I knew the developers of post-trauma really understood horror, when instead of zooming the camera right in on this thing's face, they instead chose to keep the camera at a distance, leaving most of the horrific aspects of this creature up to the player's imagination. Considering the fact that post-trauma is a love letter to classic survival horror, it should come as no surprise to anyone that the game's combat is really clunky and even downright frustrating at times. However, I chalk some of this up to the fact that Roman is an older man in his 50s or 60s. There is a very noticeable recovery period after Roman swings a melee weapon, where you are left very vulnerable to an enemy's attack. To combat this, you can perform a short dodge backwards, but doing so will also consume some of your stamina, so you can't simply exploit this maneuver whenever you see fit. I've seen a lot of people complain about the lack of enemies in Post-Trauma, and yeah, you'll definitely fight far fewer enemies than in most typical survival horror games. I think I counted around 15 or 16 enemies in the game, including bosses. The thing you have to remember though, is that every single one of these guys is a threat. Well, except this guy with no legs. He was just kind of annoying, to be honest. Jesus, it usually isn't this difficult to kill someone with no legs. Not that I know anything about that. It is very easy to die in Post-Trauma, which means every encounter becomes tense and almost exciting in a way. I should also mention that because of the low enemy count, nearly every monster you encounter will be visibly unique from the last. For such a short game, the amount of enemy variety is impressive. I won't spoil many of the enemy types here, but I found this fucking thing with a baby's voice especially creepy. It's also messed up when you need to finish the thing off and all you can hear is its sad infant cries. I mean, I usually have to use headphones when doing this kind of shit in real life. Even though there aren't many of them in the game, the bosses are also a real highlight of Post-Trauma. I especially love their designs, with the first boss in particular being a real standout. She looks like something straight out of a Dark Souls game. Boss fights are also incredibly difficult, with most of them having attacks that can finish you off in seconds. Any guns you find should only be used for these fights, as ammo is incredibly scarce. Speaking of guns, I found firearms to be surprisingly useless at times. Not only are you given very little ammunition, but Roman is simply useless at firing these things. The amount of time Roman takes to recover after firing a shotgun means that you will almost definitely die before you are given a chance to fire again. So yeah, I found the amount of enemies in Post-Trauma to be almost perfectly balanced. But thanks to y'all whining like children, the developers decided to stick in even more enemies, meaning I need to play through the game again for a fourth fucking time. Okay, so a quick update. I've just played through the first hour or so of the game and I haven't noticed any more enemies appear in the environment. They may appear later on, but from what I can see, if there are any additional enemies, they will be in short supply. So thankfully, this new patch has not unbalanced the game like I feared. I know some people will be disappointed by the lack of enemies, but trust me, if you give the game a chance, you'll realise that pretty much all these guys, it's better to have fewer enemies that are stronger than many enemies who are weaker, if that makes any sense, because it means that every encounter in the game, the enemies can be quite scary. They never lose their fear factor, which they would have if they were thrown into every single room in the game. So yeah, I still don't think it's a big deal, but yeah, those are my thoughts. I did not personally notice any extra enemies, so I didn't feel like scripting this part, so sorry if I rambled a bit. So while Post-Trauma definitely contains moments of action, most of the time you'll be exploring these derelict environments, looking for keys and trying to solve some incredibly obtuse puzzles. Post-Trauma may be the first game I've ever played where the puzzles are just perfect. Not too easy, not too hard. Except for the final puzzle, that is. That one can go fuck itself. I won't spoil it here, but you'll know it when you see it, trust me. One of my main issues with many survival horror games is that the puzzles are frequently way too easy. I mean, the recent Resident Evil games feel designed so that even people who've had half their brains removed can still partake in the puzzle solving. In Post-Trauma, however, on no less than 4 occasions, I shouted out yes upon figuring out the solution to a puzzle. The game just knows how to make me feel smart, which is something I personally never thought I'd feel again, since I had always figured I had permanently lost like 90% of my brain cells from watching hours of British television as a teenager.
anyone like Toffee Crisps?
Me.
You ain't gonna like them now.
Why?
Because she had sex with someone who wore a Toffee Crisp wrapper as a Johnny.
Some puzzles require you to pay attention to the environment around you in order to find the answer. I was stuck in this frickin' puzzle for like an hour before I decided to look around the area, and I found these letters and numbers littered around the environment. You are never simply handed the answer to any puzzle in Post-Trauma. My favourite puzzle in the game, however, has to be during this short sequence where you are playing as a young girl and are tasked with finding out the final score in a basketball game. It's a simple enough puzzle, but having to do all the maths while still remembering how many points each kind of shot is worth was strangely enjoyable. I am still shocked that so many of their reviews on Steam have paragraphs dedicated to how difficult the puzzles are. The puzzles in this game are incredibly obtuse/bad. There was one puzzle in the police station that will make you pull your hair out of your head because there are no hints at all. What puzzle? There's like 3 puzzles in the police station. One that requires you to remember some numbers on a dartboard, one that requires you to remember some shapes on a television screen, and one that requires you to be able to tell the difference between a square, triangle and circle. And I really hope for your sake it's not that one. I feel like I know what puzzle this person is referencing, and there are absolutely clues on what you're supposed to do. This guy just didn't look around hard enough. Oh yeah, so that guy's review reminded me that there's a few first person sequences in Post-Trauma where you play as that Carlos dude from the beginning of the game. They're terrible. The puzzles during these sequences are okay, but they are instantly made 10 times more infuriating due to the fact that you need to avoid this weird fist demon while exploring the police station. I initially found this thing kinda creepy until I got grabbed by it and discovered that instead of it simply eating me, it just like gave me a little punch on my tum-tum. You see, this shit is what infuriates me so much about Post-Trauma. It does so much right, but the next bug or janky animation is always right around the corner. I mean, for real, some of the design decisions the developers made with this game make literally no sense at all. For example, the game features a Resi style storage chest where you can put away any extra items you don't currently need. Thing is, you will never use even half of these slots. There just aren't that many items in the game. And on top of that, Post-Trauma also features a dynamic difficulty system, which ensures you will almost never have any items or ammunition anyways. For example, during my first 2 playthroughs, I was never able to carry any more than 2 medkits at a time. No more would show up as long as I still had 2 in my inventory. However, once I decided to start using medkits more often, they would appear all the time. Same thing with ammunition. You will find bullets in the environment all the time when you're low, but you will never be allowed to carry over a dozen or so bullets at once. I understand the developers probably did this to keep the game tense and scary, but it seems unfair to punish players for playing well, while at the same time rewarding those who play poorly. The last thing I want to touch on is the game's story. Without spoiling anything, I was pleasantly surprised by Post-Trauma's narrative during the first few hours of the game. It seemed to tackle themes of mental illness and guilt, similar to the kind of thing you'd find in Silent Hill 2, but with a few interesting ideas not really seen in most survival horror games. I liked Roman. Yeah, he's a bit one-dimensional, but the voice actor did a good job conveying the anguish and confusion the poor guy is put through during a lot of the game. At one point I thought I had figured out what was going on, but unfortunately by the final third of the game, the narrative kinda goes completely off the rails and I found things very difficult to follow. It's still an interesting narrative though. I was still intrigued by a lot of what I was seeing. So that's Post-Trauma. Look, I'm not going to lie to you and say that this game is the best thing to happen to the survival horror genre in years. It is a deeply flawed experience, but I'm shocked by how enamored I've become with it. It's not often these days that I can say that a game got under my skin, but Post-Trauma is a legitimately creepy experience at times, to the point where I almost wanted to stop playing at points. Now keep in mind that I was playing the game in the dark with headphones on, and I do live by myself, But the fact an indie game was able to unnerve me this much in the first place is a huge compliment. The puzzles are fantastic, assuming you know what a square and triangle are, and the creature design is absolutely top tier for a game made with such a small budget. Yes, the story is a bit disappointing, and there's a lot of issues that need to be patched, but for only $15, this is one of the easiest recommendations I've made in a long time. Hello, thank you for watching my video as usual. There's a few quick things I really need to get out of the way. Hopefully it won't take too long, but as usual, this part of the video will be completely unscripted, so apologies if I talk a lot of shit. Okay, first order of business is that I have been approved for YouTube memberships. This is not something I ever intended to do or that I wanted to do, but I woke up one morning and got an email from YouTube where they were like, hey, you qualify for this thing, you might as well try it. So yeah, if you look under a lot of my videos now, you should see a join button, and if you click that, you can become a member of my channel for only for only $3 a month, which is very expensive, but there is no pressure on anyone to join. I would not expect anyone to join. Why would I need anyone to join anyways when I make like €70 every 3 fucking months doing this YouTube shit? But if you do join, I was considering what I could offer as a reward, and because my channel is basically a massive rip-off of Grimbeard's channel, the best thing I could come up with is that I will give every member a shout out at the end of each of my video, and I will put their names in the credits. So just imagine your name at the end of one of my videos that probably has like 200 views. I personally can't think of a better deal than that, but if you can, please let me know. The next quick thing I'd like to point out is that it's my birthday. So if any of you would like to wish me a happy birthday and help me through this massive midlife crisis I'm currently going through, that would be very much appreciated. Thankfully, my brother, being the legend that he is, bought me Expedition 33 for my birthday, so I'm really looking forward to playing that because I've heard nothing but great things. And just getting old sucks. The next thing I would like to talk about is I would like to very much thank Blowfish Studios for offering me a review code for Vlad Circus Curse of Asmodeus. I have not played the game yet. I don't think the game's even out yet, but from the trailers it looks phenomenal, and I'm looking forward to hopefully covering the game in future. I'm always shocked when people ask me to cover their games because I'm such a small channel, so thank you. And actually, on the topic of review codes, I was reminded when I got that review code that I was also offered a review code for The Last Fate about 1.5 years ago. However, I do actually have a pretty good excuse for why I haven't covered that game yet. When I received the email for the review code, I was literally being prepped for kidney transplant surgery, so I don't really think I was in much of a position to cover the game at that point. And after I had my surgery, I needed to move back home with my parents for a month while I recovered, which basically all I did was sleep 24 hours a day for like a month. And after that, I needed to move into my new house, and as you all know, moving house can be a very daunting process, and it's very exhausting. So honestly, I don't think the developers could have picked a worse time to give me that review code. But if I don't get around to covering the game now, covering the game in a proper review, I would like to just quickly give my thoughts on the game now. I think The Last Fate is phenomenal. I think it's probably a top 5 Metroidvania for me. Almost based entirely on the game's aesthetic, its art design, its level design, and its combat mechanics. I think they're all top tier. I've seen a lot of people compare this game to Bloodborne, and I don't know if I agree with that. Aesthetically, maybe. Like, there's a lot of weapons and monsters and scenery that's very reminiscent of Bloodborne, but it's still very much a Metroidvania at the end of the day. So, but if you do enjoy Bloodborne, then you should get something out of The Last Fate. I think in terms of design, in terms of bosses, in terms of combat and level design, it's one of the best Metroidvanias I've played, and I can't recommend it enough. Hopefully I'll get a chance to cover it in the future, but if I don't, it's pretty much a 10 out of 10 from me, and you should all go buy it immediately. Aside from that, I would also like to thank a comment in my previous video that recommended that I play Shinabi. What a recommendation. This game fucking blew me away. This Shinabi comes from Neowiz, who you may know as the creators of Lies of P, and it's probably one of my favorite indie games of all time now. It's fucking incredible. It's probably the best Spider-Man game I've ever played. I suppose that's the easiest way to put it. It has a phenomenal story, an incredible story. I was shocked at how good it was for an indie game. An outstanding soundtrack and just really addictive gameplay. Again, utterly blown away by it. 10 out of 10. Buy it as soon as possible. Aside from Shinabi, I've also been playing Neon White recently, and that is very quickly becoming one of my favorite games of all time. I've obviously heard about Neon White for a while now. It's been out a few years, but I never really thought it would be as good as many people would say. Turns out it's even better. It's basically the greatest Sonic game I've ever played. It's basically a speedrunning game, and it's exhilarating, I suppose, is the word that comes to mind the most when I think of it. When you pull off a level perfectly and you hit every jump and you attack every enemy just right, it's exhilarating. There's no feeling quite like it. I have never played a game like Neon White. Like pretty much every game these days, you can always point to something that's like it. Neon White, nothing comes to mind. Maybe something like Mirror's Edge, but I'd even put Neon White in almost a genre of its own. It's outstanding, and God, I'll have to write a proper review for it someday, because it's so much better than I thought it was. I ever thought it would be, and you should definitely check it out. The last thing I would like to cover in this video is that you've probably noticed that at the beginning of this review I put a little disclaimer that pointed out that I did not use generative AI at all in the production of this video. There was a time not too long ago where I felt like I wouldn't need to point that out, but because AI has gotten so good recently, and because no one seems to want to regulate the fucking thing, I feel like I need to point that out. This is not an attack on people who like generative AI or use generative AI. I just think it's fucking atrocious. I can't use Facebook. Facebook is fucked beyond belief because of it. All social media is fucked beyond belief because of it. I feel like if it's not regulated at all, it's going to result in a lot of artists, a lot of filmmakers, a lot of writers, a lot of musicians being put out of work through no fault of their own, and I don't think that's fair. I made a video earlier on today where I put my thoughts into better context, so I'm going to show that video now. So please take it away, Ben with the severely crooked glasses. Hello. I thought I would record this part in real life so that I am able to prove that I'm not a bot. No, stop crooked. My glasses are fucking crooked now. Hello. I thought I would record this part in real life so that I'm able to prove that I'm not a bot. As fucking crazy as those words sound coming out of my mouth, AI has got so good lately that this seems to be necessary nowadays. I think we desperately need regulation for AI soon, and if we don't get it, within, I'd say, 2 to 3 years, you're not going to be able to tell if a voice in a video is real, if the visuals are real, or even if the video itself is real. I obviously don't use AI to voice my videos, and if I did, I certainly won't get them to use whatever fucking accent this is supposed to be. So, if the internet isn't dead already, it sure as fuck will be within another 2 to 3 years. So, basically, I'm not getting a lot of pleasure out of doing YouTube anymore because I feel like the internet is just so... What's the point anymore when the internet is just so full of slop anyways? And what's the point when you can't even tell who you're talking to is real or a bot? It's kind of getting ridiculous, if I'm being honest. I felt like I needed to do this to prove that I'm not a bot, and even the fact that I'm even having to say that just shows how out of hand things are getting. So I had a lot more I wanted to say on this, but the video is already getting way too long, so I will leave it there. So until AI gets regulated, I will continue to put that disclaimer at the start of each of my videos that the video in question was not made by AI. So yeah, it's frustrating. I'm not going to lie. The death of the internet is a very frustrating thing because it's probably the greatest thing humanity has ever created, and because of sheer greed and power and whatever else, it's been destroyed. So yeah, bit of a downer to end on, but I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please like it if you enjoyed it, thumb it down if you didn't, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.